Story 1. Last night, I was included in a group email in which a manager demanded we add documents to a job. I replied privately, saying I did not think those documents were required. He replied, copying everyone, and severely reprimanded me for not knowing they were required and for questioning him. Several others joined in, agreeing with him and criticizing me. 20 minutes later, the manager sent another email stating the documents were not required for the job. He did not apologize. Story 2. I was leading a development team programming the user interface for a set-top box for an old-school pre-Netflix streaming service in Japan. Another company had been contracted to create the mobile phone interface for the same service. About 6 months in, and less than 2 months from final delivery, the client's boss was replaced. The new boss decided he did not like what the client had previously approved and demanded we completely start over from scratch and redo everything on a schedule they dictated. I refused and had a serious argument with the client. It was too close to delivery to replace us, so I stood my ground. Even my developers, who were all Japanese, wanted to give in because the customer is always right, but I insisted we would not. Instead, I told the client how and when we would deliver what the customer wanted, entirely on our terms and schedule. The client was upset but had no choice but to agree. When delivery arrived, we delivered exactly what was ordered, completely on time, and 99.99% bug-free. There was no crunch or overtime. All my developers went home at night. Meanwhile, the mobile contractor had apparently accepted the client's demands without argument and then failed miserably. Their delivery was a bug-ridden disaster with schedule and cost overruns. In the end, the client apologized for arguing with me and thanked me for not backing down. That was probably the greatest vindication I have ever experienced. Story 3. I worked for a company and warned that their project decisions and recent explosive expansion, after tripling headcount in a couple of years, would force them to lay off half the staff as soon as the next project was released because it was going to fail and everyone pretended otherwise. I was paid off and left the company. They laid people off after the project was released, and management received golden parachutes. Story 4. As a teenager, I had a motorbike and was the only one of my friends who did. I told them that to turn left at speed, you first steer briefly to the right. That causes the bike to lean to the left. You can look up counter-steering. My friends made fun of me for years and refused to look it up. When a few of them later started riding motorbikes, they quietly accepted counter-steering and downplayed having mocked me. In retrospect, I realized they tended to ignore my experience. Even though I studied mechanical engineering at university, they assumed another friend was right because he had a few good grades in math in high school. A decade later, they are no longer my friends, and I feel better for it. Some people need to knock others down to feel better about themselves. Story 5. When I was 10, I got into a heated argument with my entire class about Lucky Luke shooting faster than his own shadow. One kid had brought it up. I pointed out that, technically, everyone shoots faster than their own shadow, even if the difference is too small to be seen. The class called me an idiot because, they said, everybody knows that light is instant. However, we had learned a few weeks earlier that if the sun went out, it would take 8 minutes for us to notice. Lucky Luke's shadow is simply a consequence of him blocking the light. I went to the blackboard and drew the sun and the earth, representing light as droplets like a shower. When you turn off the shower, the droplets already falling do not magically disappear. They keep falling. So, logically, when Luke creates his shadow by moving his arms, it takes a little while for that change to appear in his shadow. This did not compute with the rest of the class. The teacher sat in her chair, enjoying the debate. She stepped in when everyone started calling me a lunatic, and I became frustrated that nobody would accept something so obvious. I was no young Sheldon and did a lot of age-appropriate stupid things, but I still feel the frustration of the whole class egging me on like a bunch of cavemen. Story 6. The finance director at the company I worked for sent a company-wide email warning people that if you were mugged at an automated teller machine, you should enter your personal identification number backwards to secretly call the police. It was chain-letter junk. Being young and foolish, I replied to all to explain why this was dangerous nonsense. The finance director replied dismissively. My manager emailed me privately to say that I should not contradict the higher-ups in public. Story 7. It was a large game show on a cruise with a big stage and heavy promotion all week. The format was like Family Feud. The question was, what is people's biggest fear? Knowing that at a funeral people would statistically rather be in the casket than give the eulogy, I answered, public speaking. I was instantly booed off the stage and my team replaced me. I walked away embarrassed, laughed at by a few thousand people. As I heard the ding announcing the number one answer, I just went back to my room. Story 8. I was a volunteer operations staff member at a comic and anime convention. During a break, I dropped in on one of the industry panels that was doing a free raffle. I had not changed out of my staff shirt because I still liked helping congoers and other staff as I walked the halls. The company representatives had no qualms about giving me a ticket when I walked through the door. It turned out I won one of the lower tier prizes. As I walked up front to get my prize, someone shouted, "Hey, no fair. He works here." And the room of about 100 people began to boo me. I snapped back, "I work for the convention, not this company. I am helping run the entire convention for free." The room went silent. I collected my prize and walked back to my seat. The funny part was that I was not even interested in the prize. I do not remember what it was. Story 9. My cousin's girlfriend cheated on him and they broke up. I told him never to go back because she would do it again. They reconciled, decided to have a child, and she cheated again. They split once more. Now they are back together. And he says he is only pretending, so he can get laid and avoid paying child support. I call that nonsense. I am not going to pick up his pieces and glue him back together when she inevitably breaks his heart. Story 10. Someone told me that Islam was the world's oldest religion. When I said Hinduism was the oldest, they became angry and called me a racist. Note: this comment became more popular than I expected. Hello, everyone. I hope you stay safe and have a great day. Story 11. In 10th grade, my teacher tried to tell me that Thomas Edison discovered electricity. I said no, it was Ben Franklin with the kite and key. We argued for 10 minutes or so, and the class backed her up. Eventually, I was sent to the library to do research. She was not happy with my findings. Story 12. I had an ongoing argument with human resources. I kept telling them the person scheduled to work the shift after mine was showing up late, not performing the work, leaving issues for others to handle, and stealing time. I was told they did not care and that if I continued to bring it up, they would fire me. In other words, why are you threatening to fire me for being annoying to you when I'm right about the person actually breaking the rules? Story 13. Every time I comment on the relationships advice subreddit that the original poster should not divorce their spouse of 10 years over one silly disagreement. Story 14. We were talking about random topics with a coworker. I mentioned that we humans are animals. She started laughing, making monkey noises and gestures, and insisting that we are not animals. I asked another coworker to confirm my statement, and she finally shut up. I was 22 and the coworker was in her 50s. As we say in French, she was dumb as a broom. Story 15. That one time I argued against killing disabled people in a YouTube comment section. Story 16. Almost every time I am on a gaming subreddit discussing what I would like to see in future updates to the game, I cannot count how many times I have made a reasonable suggestion and 5 people have explained in detail why I am wrong, why it would never work, or why it is pointless. Then, a year or so later, an update demonstrates exactly what I was proposing. I usually remain fairly restrained and resist the urge to return to those conversations and provoke the participants. Story 17. A long time ago, I had 2 friends over and showed them Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They both said it was not funny, looked at me, and said that because there were 2 of them and 1 of me, they must be right. Story 18. Everyone in class was cold. I, excited by a fact I had learned the week before, said that if we turned the ceiling fans clockwise, we could warm up. The girl next to me shrieked and cackled, then said, "That's, not how fans work, sweetie." Most people laughed with her. I have no idea if the fan trick would have heated the whole classroom, but clockwise ceiling fans do circulate warm air. Story 19. I was nervous about Donald Trump winning in 2016. People I knew who considered themselves political wonks and had studied political science laughed in my face and called me stupid. Story 20. When I tell my wife I do not remember something, I take 3 medications that cause memory problems and I have epilepsy. If it were not for password managers, I would reset 100 passwords a day. Story 21. Pretty much any liberal take in the southern United States, even if it is a provable fact. Climate change is real and caused by human activity. The meat industry is terrible for the environment and unjustifiably cruel. Fetuses are not babies, and no, you cannot walk into a clinic at 9 months pregnant and obtain an abortion anywhere. We do not want to ban guns in Texas. We want universal background checks. There are currently no private sale laws in Texas. This so-called gun show loophole allows private sellers to transfer firearms without a background check. The only stipulation is that if you knew the buyer would use it for a crime, you could be held legally responsible, which means practically nothing. It is very irresponsible. You are not poor because of immigrants and taxes. You are poor because wealthy people are hoarding wealth, wages are stagnant, corporate greed is raising prices for no reason, and tax breaks favor the rich. Those tax breaks will not be for you if you make $30,000 a year. Being gay is not a choice or a moral failing. Evolution is real. America is not a Christian nation, and the Founding Fathers did not use the 10 Commandments as the basis for the Constitution. Jesus is disappointed in you, and John would call you a pit of vipers. Story 22. Once on Reddit, the conversation was about birth and labor. I corrected people who said childbirth is inherently painful and dangerous and who were spreading fear and misinformation by claiming that cesarean sections are better. Cesarean sections are not better, and labor should not be inherently excruciating. There is some pain, but it should not be a traumatic experience. Much of the pain and trauma results from obstetric violence, which still occurs frequently. Consider the positions providers place women in during birth. Many believe that lying on the back is the only option because movies and television portray it that way. Research shows that this position is not only more painful but also increases the chance of complications and can delay labor. I was heavily downvoted on that post. I am a women's health specialist. Story 23. There is a huge problem with poor communication across research and development in science and technology. The reason is simple. The science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education field has no professional communication courses at all. Add the fact that people in science and technology tend to be introverts, and you get entire industries that cannot communicate, constantly confuse one another, and generate unnecessary stress for everyone. If you point out that this stress and confusion are caused by basic poor communication, they will insist it is something else they cannot articulate, but it is a communication problem. Story 24. In early 2020, I told people I thought coronavirus disease 2019 might be a real issue, but they argued it was just media hype and said I was naive for believing them. Story 25. There are many of them on Reddit. I will post a comment containing information for which I am qualified because it relates to my degree, certifications, or my job, and people will downvote me as if what I am saying is not a verifiable fact. Laughing out loud. Story 26. When I was in middle school, we took a state mathematics exam and one question asked which of these is not a linear equation. The question was unexpected and different from the usual find x calculation problems. I remembered that an equation is not linear when the variable appears in the denominator, so I chose the only answer with a variable in the denominator. After the exam, students compared answers. The funny, smart, popular boy drew a crowd. When someone asked him about that question, he gave a different answer than mine. Instinctively, I said he was wrong and told them my choice. He began explaining at length why I was mistaken, and I tried to insist I was right. I should point out that I was considered one of the top students in the class, so I had a reputation to back my opinion. Still, I was not used to a one-on-one debate in middle school, especially with others watching. My only argument was that the variable was in the denominator. I couldn't fully explain the reasoning. It got heated, and I could see from their faces that no one accepted my weak explanation and my confidence was less convincing than his, so I dropped it. Mainly, everyone accepted his answer. I went home and didn't bother looking up the solution because it was too infuriating to think about. Eventually, I forgot until exam results came back. I had a perfect score on that mathematics exam, so I gave myself an internal fist bump. I'm sure someone looked it up or asked the teacher later, but no one came to tell me I was right. Story 27. Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer. Sanchez R. Story 28. 4 years ago, I said that President Joe Biden should serve only a single term because his age would be an issue. I also had major reservations about Vice President Kamala Harris using the vice presidency as a springboard to the presidency. I was downvoted repeatedly. In the spring of 2023, before Donald Trump officially announced his campaign, I thought it was a bad idea for Biden to run again and that we needed a primary. I received more criticism. This summer, when Biden performed poorly at the debate, withdrew, and Harris became the nominee without input from voters, I understood the urgency and hoped for the best. I also said we needed an actual primary in 2028 and that Harris's only real advantage was that she was not Trump. Again, I faced criticism. I do not think most Democrats were opposed to a black woman president. They just did not want that particular candidate. She is unlikely to run in 2028. I hope Governor Gavin Newsom runs. If the nominee is Mayor Pete Buttigieg, I think we are in trouble. I voted for Harris and would vote for Pete Buttigieg too, but I would be delusional to think America is ready for a gay president. Story 29. A pedophile argued there was nothing wrong with him and that loving children in that way should not be frowned upon. I told him in no uncertain terms how disgusting that was, and I was apparently in the wrong. Story 30. I said that servers must declare 100% of their tips. I was downvoted to oblivion. Story 31. When my boss said that makeup contains bat guano, I told him it was a similar sounding component from fish scales. He claimed he was correct because a person who sells makeup told him so and he had looked it up on the internet. I told him we would have to agree to disagree. I do not argue with people more experienced at being idiots than I am. Story 32. I had a lot of arguments with family members about Barack Obama. Claims that he is from Kenya, that he is coming to every house to take their guns, that he is the Antichrist, and that he personally caused the British petroleum oil spill. Story 33. I cycle to work every day. Last week, after waiting in slow traffic for 10 minutes, the lane cleared and the car behind me passed. As he did, he shouted, "Ride on the sidewalk, asshole." Out the window. Where I live, that's illegal. Story 34. The driver behind me was aggressively honking and flipping me off because I did not turn right on a red light that had a sign saying no turn on red. Story 35. Every time I explain that clingy, needy, or anxiously attached people are not fragile beings who need to be coddled, but are often emotionally abusive and should remain single until they have worked with a therapist to develop a more secure attachment style. I explain that women who do not want their partners to have female friends are toxic for reinforcing the false idea that men cannot view women as people and maintain healthy platonic friendships. I explain that just because something makes you uncomfortable does not mean other people should accommodate you. Story 36. I predicted that Trump would win in 2016, in the middle of a sociology course at a community college in a very liberal part of New Jersey. My professor was a self-proclaimed feminist who sneered at me when I said, "People are upset. They don't like Clinton, and I think the Clinton campaign is taking their lead for granted." The whole class snickered, and she laughed it off like I was a fucking idiot for saying it. She was crying at her desk the following morning, and I remember her looking up as I walked in. She said, "Do you really think this is okay?" I responded, "We still had to come here today, didn't we?" Story 37. I took the opposing position in a subreddit about sex. The original poster had given her 15-year-old niece sex toys without discussing it with the niece's mother, who is her sister. I was banned from the forum after saying that it would have been in the best interest of everyone involved for the mother to have a say. Story 38. Almost every day of my life I stay calm. I do not get fired up or angry. I usually remain as objective as I can. That can make people hostile toward me because sometimes they just want to get upset, excited, complain, or whine. At a young age, I realized most people see life as an eternal us versus them. If you do not agree with them, they assume you are against them, which is very foolish in my opinion. Story 39. In a thread on Reddit about how Generation Z would save us, I just said laughing out loud, "Yeah, right." Story 40. In high school United States history class, I was saying something that included the phrase, when we won the Civil War? And a classmate interrupted and incredulously said, "We? Where do you think you are?" I was surprised and became defensive. I said, "I am sorry. I was under the impression the United States won the Civil War." The students all laughed. It was hard to tell whether they were laughing with me, at me, or somewhere in between. At the time, I felt the class agreed with that student. I am not so sure now. I definitely learned a valuable lesson that day. I am glad I spoke up, and I hope the other student learned something as well. Story 41. Feels like just about any time I say something lately. Story 42. Anytime I comment in my city's subreddit, I ask myself why all these city subreddits are like that. Story 43. I work as a teacher. I told colleagues that students aged 6 to 16 should speak Swedish, since we are a Swedish school in Sweden, not Arabic, and that Swedish should be the norm. I was called racist. 2 years later, it became a rule at my school. Immigrant parents are thankful because they want their children to learn Swedish and use it. Story 44. When I suggested that you cannot trust people to do the right thing and that the only way to save the planet is for a benevolent dictator to take over. Story 45. In the 4th week of February 2020, I told my family to stop visiting each other while I figured out what was going on in my hospital. The first confirmed case of community-acquired coronavirus disease 2019 in the United States. Story 46. I said Walter White is an unlikable asshole, and that is why I do not want to watch the show. Story 47. Life tip. Don't argue with stupid people. It never turns out well. Story 48. Years ago, I was in a management meeting rushing a project to write software for a bank. We had very little time and every available hour mattered. The delivery date was the following Friday, the Friday after Martin Luther King Day. Someone said we would all have to work through the weekend to finish. Another person said, "We lose a day because Monday is Martin Luther King Day." No one in the room realized that while Martin Luther King Day was a holiday for the bank, it was not for our company. That meant our team had an extra day to complete the work. I said, "That's a holiday for them, not for us." Everyone at the conference table looked at me in wide-eyed horror. People assumed I meant that Martin Luther King Day mattered to black people but not to the mostly white employees at our company. Not a single person interpreted them as the bank employees, even though the bank staff had been referred to as them earlier. I tried to explain, but everyone thought I was backtracking after being accused of saying something racist. I almost got fired. I explained my case to Human Resources, who listened to the meeting recording and agreed it should have been obvious what I meant. They sent an email to everyone who had been in the meeting, but by then the rumor mill had spread that I was a horrible racist. My relationships at the company never fully recovered, and I eventually took another job because I knew things would never go back to normal. So be careful with those pronouns. Story 49. I get it on Reddit all the time. I am routinely downvoted for pointing out inconvenient facts. It has always baffled me. Do these people think that frowning dimly and mashing the downvote button somehow makes the bad facts go away? I was permanently banned from the I Am a subreddit when a moderator decided they did not like that I was recounting the facts of the Amain Khalif case. I did not state any strong opinions. I simply pointed out what was known and what was not. Story 50. A thread asked about commonly believed myths, and I mentioned learning styles. People did not like that. Story 51. I live in Alberta, home of oil and gas. I installed solar panels, bought an electric vehicle, and posted a picture showing me charging my car from the sun with the caption, "No more gas for this guy." That did not go over well. I do not know why I expected that. I guess electric vehicle owners are expected to keep driving to the gas station and continue giving them money. Story 52. My cousin, who had just gotten clean for the 57th time this year, and I told my family, "We shall see how long this phase lasts." Everyone was mad, but I saw his latest Facebook post. It looks like he used speech to text and was extremely high. This is my father's side of the family, and many people are on meth, crack, and pills. I do not see this cousin climbing out of his addiction. Earlier this year, he did not come to my grandfather's funeral but showed up at my grandparents' old house with needles containing drugs. I just do not have the strong Christian or Catholic faith like everyone else in the family. Laughing out loud. Story 53. I was written up at work for cautioning someone on Facebook in very polite terms, and not as part of my job against a certain kind of counseling. I responded with the American Psychological Association positional paper supporting my position. All three who wrote me up have since left or been fired. Story 54. I received more than 200 downvotes on Monday for saying you cannot trust the Iowa poll that predicted Harris would win. Story 55. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Donald Trump winning the election. Story 56. Whenever I stay in the lane that is about to be closed until the merge, everyone moves into the active lane too early and then gets mad at me for obeying traffic laws. Story 57. A queer friend who presented themselves as very politically correct asked another friend and me why people could not be transracial if people are allowed to be trans. I explained that those were completely different issues. Transracial usually refers to adoption, not identifying as a different race. They told me I was taking the topic too seriously and that I was getting upset, which I was not. I was just confused by their stance. That friend decided to have the conversation on their stream the next day. I warned them it was a bad idea because the majority of their community is queer and would not take the subject lightly, but they said it would be fine and that I was overreacting. The next day they told me viewers were annoyed that they had posed it as a devil's advocate question and found it offensive. One viewer, who was the product of a transracial adoption, corrected them on the term. My friend decided to avoid those topics on stream from then on. They should have listened to me. It made me side-eye them heavily for a while, but they have since taken the time to educate themselves on these topics. Story 58. The one thing I hold over my husband's head as a joke is that when we moved into our house we needed to replace the carpet because, first, you always should, and second, it was rough looking. Burnt holes, ripped up spots, probably a good 20 years old, the works. I argued we should get wood or laminate flooring. We had 2 cats, 2 dogs, and we were planning to have children. I wanted an easy-to-clean floor with washable rugs. My husband was adamant that carpet was better because it was cheaper, and admittedly we were tight on funds after buying the place. So I let him have his carpet, ready to let him find out for himself. It took about 2 years, but he finally admitted I was right as our then 1-year-old flung food everywhere. The dogs tracked in dirt and fur, and our now 3 cats shed all over. We have to vacuum every day because, between kids and animals, the floor is a mess. Told you so. I now have permission to get what I want when we can afford to move. Story 59. I quit working when my husband's job kept us moving. During one move, I was off for several months and we both liked it, so I did not return to work. Even now, more than 20 years later, I still get flack for staying home. All but one of the people who have criticized me have been women. It seems the idea of having choices applies only if we make the approved choice. Story 60. My friend was talking about someone from high school and said he is a doctor now. I asked what kind. She said he has a Doctor of Philosophy degree in history now. I said he was not a real doctor then. Story 61. Anytime Ricky Gervais is in front of the Hollywood establishment. Story 62. When I said the Marvels would fail because it did not look like a good movie, people called me racist and misogynist. My favorite responses were Ms. Marvel made over $1 billion and this movie is not for people like you. The movie looked boring and I was told it was, hence the flop. Story 63. Your boyfriend didn't step up. You just don't care anymore. She wanted to break up 2 days ago, but one insincere, "Hey pretty girl" message changed her mind. He copied and pasted that from Bare Minimum, the novel. Story 64. People who voted for Alternative for Germany lose their fucking brains and intelligence quotient while voting. Story 65. I told my family that I thought it was a bad idea for Biden to drop out of the race. I said his gaffes were the result of superficial weaknesses, such as his lifelong stutter and occasional fatigue associated with aging, rather than actual cognitive decline or a weakness in leadership ability. Story 66. As a smart kid, I had plenty of them at school. Don't trigger my post-traumatic stress disorder. Story 67. A friend and I were in Branson, Missouri, and went to Dolly Parton's Dixie Stampede years ago. At the very beginning, Dolly's voice came over the loudspeaker and said one side of the arena would be the South and the other side the North, an obvious nod to the Civil War. She first said, "Let's have a big cheer for the South," and the crowd erupted in cheers. Then she said, "Now let's have a big cheer for the North," and everybody booed. I nudged my friend and said, "They're booing the good guys." Sadly, it was a portent of things to come. Story 68. I predicted that Daenerys Targaryen would turn evil in Season 3. Without the inspirational music that swells whenever she acts, you realize she is a psycho. Story 69. When I said Drusky-type comedy is for the lowest form of human living. Story 70. I was downvoted on Reddit for saying I expect Donald Trump to win. Story 71. I predicted the election winner when it was announced that Kamala Harris would replace Joe Biden, because the election was so close. No one believed me, even though it was the only rational conclusion. There was no way she could campaign in as many states as needed that close to the election. I was laughed at, and I am the only one of my friends who is not shocked in the slightest by the results. I am conservative and did not vote because neither candidate was adequate. I do not believe in voting for the lesser of two evils. To me, that contributes to the overall problem. Story 72. I was slightly downvoted on the Ask Balkans subreddit for expressing concerns about the threat posed by Vladimir Putin. Story 73. That asshole who shouted at me for parking in the wrong place and would not stop honking can go fuck himself now because I was right. I still parked elsewhere and had a terrible mental breakdown. I am sorry. I am still mad about it and needed to vent. Story 74. Every job I have had since graduation more than 10 years ago involved problems with following the written procedural instructions in laboratory settings that I was trained on, even when I followed the training and testing procedures exactly. My work was considered too slow because other employees only made the work look properly done to meet deadlines set by management, not the actual time required to perform the testing correctly. In summary, employees in many laboratory environments outside medical and research and development contexts are expected to meet deadlines by sacrificing proper procedures. I was criticized for following direct instructions and trained methods and told to cut corners to make the work appear correct but faster. Story 75. During residency, a private investment firm tried to persuade a group of young doctors to use their services for retirement planning. They wined and dined us and met individually to discuss investment strategy, claiming they could do better by micromanaging our accounts. There was a fee. I walked away from the meetings thinking I could probably manage this myself with a Fidelity investment account set for my retirement date. A few friends took the bait despite my warnings. I argued with them, then realized they had already handed over their money. One became very angry, so I stopped raising the issue. Several later moved their money and had to pay an exit fee. I do not trust anyone who has to work that hard to get me to buy a product or service. Story 76. I told my sister that she and her boyfriend might not be compatible, and that is okay. She became angry when I asked her to think about the life she wants. 5 months later, they broke up. She tried to hide it for another 4 months. Story 77. In a compound interest lesson, 2 equations were on the board. The teacher told us to move to one side of the room if we thought option A was correct and to the other side if we thought option B was correct. Many students initially chose A, then some lost confidence and switched sides. After doing the math and recalling the equation, I moved to the B side. I was the only person there and I was right. That was years ago. I wonder what it is now. Story 78. When I said the Russian invasion of Ukraine was inevitable, I was banned from Twitter and called a Russian supporter. Later, I found out it was a tactic to suppress that information so that fighting-age men would not leave the country. I was called many mean things for simply telling the truth. Story 79. Pretty much everything my neighbor and I disagree about. Her answer to everything is, "You're wrong." She is 75 years old but behaves like a 15-year-old. She insists her hearing is wonderful, puts all calls on speaker, and then holds the phone up to her ear every time. When Hillary was running for office, my neighbor would often publicly shout that this was a Hillary house, and that the candidate was a die-hard liberal Democrat. After Hillary lost, the neighbor stopped supporting her and denied that she was a Democrat. She also calls black people the N-word and other racial slurs to their faces. Story 80. I had to deliver a product at work but could not immediately find evidence to support the claims I had made in it. My boss was livid. The next week, additional supporting evidence appeared. I found it and sent it to my boss. My boss claimed they were responsible for finding that content. Story 81. Court of public opinion equals blackmail. They took me out back and shot me. Story 82. Once I went home for Christmas and my mom was acting very strange. I told her I thought the diet pills she was taking might be affecting her. She told me I had always been a know-it-all and that I thought I was so much smarter than everybody. When she stopped the pills, she returned to normal. We have never spoken of it again, but I will never forget it. Story 83. I've gone on some really stupid rants in my life. Too many to list. Story 84. I commented that players in an online trading card game should not be surprised to pay $5 to obtain the highest rarity wild card. A wild card lets you purchase a card of that rarity directly from the collection instead of opening packs to try to get specific cards. These cards sell for $300 to $300 on the secondary market. Because there is no secondary market or trading in the online game, I was called dumb and received about 200 downvotes for that comment. What business trying to make money would give away its rarest products for a low price? Story 85. Whenever the fascism/Nazism is left-wing debate arises, I explain that Mussolini deliberately sat on the right side of parliament, defined fascism as right-wing, and that historically capitalism was considered left-wing. People often react negatively. People were also upset when I pointed out that Argentina was a fascist state until Milei came along. Peronists have a long history of worshipping Nazis and killing Jews, yet some refuse to call them fascists. Story 86. Some years ago, someone posted that his wife had done a boudoir photo session that apparently included a younger man. Many people accused his wife of cheating. I wrote that, from what I could tell, the photo shoot was more likely legitimate and that the photographer had pressured his wife into posing for shots she had not expected. I was initially heavily downvoted. When the original poster returned and said he had spoken to his wife and the photographer, it turned out exactly as I had guessed, and I was later upvoted more than I had been downvoted. Story 87. I know this sounds like an old trope, but here goes. Way back in the 1980s, I was taking a high school English literature course, a college prep course before advanced placement English existed in my school system. We had a teacher I really liked and respected. She was kind and helped me learn to write and develop ideas for essays. I was struggling to graduate with a B average and get into a state school, so I was not looking to act like a smartass to any teacher. One day we were talking about a classic we had been assigned to read. She went out of her way to explain the difference between Before Christ and Anno Domini, saying that before Christ means before Christ and that Anno Domini meant after death. For some odd reason, I felt compelled to raise my hand and tell her that Anno Domini is Latin and means in the year of our Lord, referring to the years after his birth. I honestly did not want her going through life not knowing this. I was a dopey 16-year-old who did not want to see her look uneducated. She doubled down and tried to embarrass me. I did everything I could to explain myself. I asked if, since Christ lived to 33, how we could explain the missing 33 years in her Before Christ and Anno Domini timeline. It turned out she was very religious and got upset. She yelled at me and sent me to the dean's office. I showed up at the dean's office with my referral, and he just face-bombed inside. He said he would inform her that she was wrong. I was given a Saturday school detention for disruption. I never received an apology or even an acknowledgement from that teacher. That was the first and last time I tried to participate in class. Story 88. I told my coworkers that the man who wrote the United States national anthem was related to the author of The Great Gatsby. They laughed in my face. One of them had a master's degree in literature and told me that not all people with the same first name are related. They were silent when I showed them the truth. Jerks. Story 89. As soon as I read about what was happening in Wuhan in early January 2020, I went to the store, bought supplies, and told everyone I knew that this was going to be bad and to do the same. They all thought I was paranoid, but guess who had toilet paper? Story 90. For many Reddit users, I would say any comment they post that receives downvotes. Story 91. There was a man in the town where I work who was mentally unstable and wore scary masks. One day he got in another man's face, yelling and cussing. The man hit him. He was arrested but could not be held. Everyone at work said, "He's trying to get punched to get a lawsuit." And the kitchen crew laughed at my view that he was mentally ill and not acting for money. No matter what I said, they would not believe me. A few weeks later, I learned I had been correct. I did not bring it up again at work and simply chalked it up to cultural differences and moved on. Story 92. I can't recall what the problem was, but in middle school math class, a popular girl in the class answered a question and the teacher said she was correct. My friend beside me and I had a different answer from the one given. We went over it again, were sure we were right, and told the teacher. The popular girl became angry and began hurling insults. Her friends joined in, and soon the entire class was laughing at my friend and me. The teacher looked at the problem again, worked it out, and noticed that the answer in the book was wrong. We were right. Of course, being middle school, the class still snickered for the rest of the period, but we were justified in calling it out. Story 93. My family was unaware of cacao and laughed at me about how it is pronounced. It is very infuriating. Story 94. People on Reddit must have told me dozens of times that technically everybody had already voted for Kamala in the primary, and it would not change anything to prop her up in his place. Turns out giving people no choice is a great way to sap their enthusiasm, and 13 to 15 million people seem to agree with me. Story 95. When I told a friend that her getting extremely drunk and flirting heavily with my then boyfriend, who was clearly uncomfortable, in front of me and her husband was not okay, she became defensive and blamed the alcohol. I told her that if the genders were reversed, she would have been outraged by a drunk man creeping on a woman. She did not like that because she was outspoken about being a feminist. We are no longer friends, but she stopped drinking. Story 96. I had an argument about math in the multiple sclerosis subreddit. It boils down to this. The incidence of multiple sclerosis in the general population is 1 in 1,000. I was told that having a parent with multiple sclerosis increased my chances by only 2%. But actually it is now 1 in 50, which is 2%. Yes, that is a 2% chance, but that is not a 2% increase. A 2% increase would change the probability from 0.001 to 0.00102. People often misunderstand percentages. If your chance of something is 10%, a 50% increase does not mean 60%. It means 15%. Story 97. In 3rd through 6th grade, I had a ridiculously loud, aggressive, TikTok-obsessed class. One time in biology class, we were talking about evolution, and when I said that humans evolved from monkeys, nearly the entire class flipped out. Apart from me and 2 other friends, my entire class was religious. I do not have anything against Islam or religion in general. You have your beliefs. The funny part is that one student loudly yelled, "I am not a filthy animal." The thing is, he behaved very much like an alpha male gorilla. I was not even mad. I just cracked up laughing. Story 98. Today, when I was at school, my mom, who is very protective of me and my outfits, lets me wear it only if she thinks it is appropriate. When I arrived, I was told I needed to take off my fishnet stockings. I read the dress code, refused to remove them, and pointed out their own rules and how everyone was violating the dress code. I have been dress coded a lot. That is how you know my fashion is top tier. Story 99. I am the person at work who encourages people to slow down, plan, and execute decisively. This conflicts with business practices that favor shipping quickly with the promise of fixing issues later. A very ambitious coworker wanted to make a change to improve operations and brought the idea to me. I told him it was a bad idea for 3 reasons. It would likely break critical workflows, create hard-to-recover failures, and introduce unforeseen dependencies. The coworker did not like my answer and went over my head. My manager directed me to make the change. I expressed my reservations, but I was overridden. I made the change and waited to see what would happen. During the night shift, the team had to page the on-call person to address basic issues. That was the first domino. When staff arrived at 8, there was widespread chaos. I calmly began fixing what I could, but it was a long process. Things returned to normal after a couple of days, and the post-mortem review was uncomfortable for everyone except me. The coworker learned to be more reasonable, and my manager learned to listen more closely. Story 100. During the United States invasion and occupation of Iraq, I was an undergraduate at a United States college and got into a political discussion with my entire extended family. I said I agreed with my international relations professor that the United States entered the war with no exit plan, that it would become a quagmire in the region, and that leaving would be difficult. It was especially concerning because my cousin was in the military and being deployed there. My extended family had a huge argument that boiled down to telling me I was just a kid and did not know anything, and they shut me down. History proved me right, but none of those family members will admit it, and I will not discuss current events or politics with them. Story 101. I tried to explain that brown eyes are dominant over blue eyes to a group of blue-eyed people, and they were so offended. I'm not insulting anyone. It's science. I learned it in school. Story 102. I am regularly downvoted in the marriage subreddit for saying men and women can be platonic friends. Story 103. I compared my campus to a penitentiary because a full team of armed police officers patrols the halls. The community college is in a historically impoverished side of town, predominantly Black and Hispanic. It is clear what the implications are of this approach to security. Story 104. I remember very clearly in kindergarten telling the child next to me that he could not be a lion when he grew up. It seemed impossible because I had already thought of it. When he became upset, the teacher told me he could be whatever he wanted. I am 32 and I still think about this sometimes. Story 105. Back when the former governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, had his burnt cork controversy, everyone on Twitter was saying his resignation was imminent, as if that were a basic, indisputable fact. I replied, "Of course he is not going to resign. What is anyone going to do if he does not?" Everyone said my prediction was dumb. He did not resign. I dined out on that one for a few years, not gonna lie. Story 106. My best friend was interested in a man whom no one else liked. Both her sisters and brothers could not stand him. She tried to use me as a moral compass. I listened to what everyone else said but reached my own conclusion. He seemed fine until he said he could say whatever he wanted to her and she would still come back to him. She did not want to hear it. At that moment I told her he was not the one. She became pregnant by him, thinking it would make things better, only to be shocked when he doubled down on his behavior, even though he had already shown who he was. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.